On the 26th of September, 1991, 8 people were sealed inside a 3-acre glass building near a town called Oracle. Over the next 16 months, the oxygen in the air they were breathing fell from 21% to about 14%. Twice more had to be pumped in from outside. The building had been designed to balance itself. The plants inside were supposed to hand the crew's carbon dioxide back to them as oxygen. That is not what was happening. Arizona has more than 275 documented ghost towns, places that were functioning communities once and are not anymore. The state is very good at swallowing things, and most of what it has swallowed never made the news. 10 of them made this list. We start at number 10, and we are not easing into anything. A sealed glass world on a desert hillside, where 8 people spent 2 years slowly running out of air inside their own experiment. Stay until number 3. There are 272 concrete crosses lying in the Arizona dirt, each one 60 feet across, laid out in a perfect grid. The famous explanation for why they are there is wrong. If you like the places this country built, used, and then quietly walked away from, subscribe. We post one of these every week. Today, we are counting down 10 things found in Arizona's desert. Number 10. Biosphere 2, the air went into the walls. You come up the highway out of Oracle, climbing, and you see it a long time before you reach it. White steel and glass on an open hillside, stepped like a pyramid, throwing desert light back at you. Mesquite and scrub run right up to the edge of it. It has no business being there. Inside, the first thing that registers is the sound. A constant mechanical hum, running water somewhere, and underneath both, the flat dead acoustics of a room that has been sealed against the world. 91 feet at the highest point. 6,500 panes of glass. 3.14 acres of floor, sitting on a welded stainless steel liner weighing 500 tons, because the ground underneath had to be sealed off too. It was built between 1987 and 1991. Privately funded, as a working miniature of the Earth. The name says everything about the ambition. The planet you are standing on is Biosphere 1. This was the second one. Under the glass were 7 engineered environments. A rainforest, an ocean with a coral reef in it, mangrove wetland, savanna, fog desert, a farm, and living quarters for 8 people. On the 26th of September, 1991, 4 men and 4 women went inside and the doors were closed behind them. They came out 2 years later to the day. The oxygen started falling almost immediately. Over the first 16 months, it dropped from 20.9%, which is normal air, to roughly 14%. That is the partial pressure you would be breathing at around 4,200 meters of elevation. The crew were doing manual farm labor in it. They reported exhaustion, disrupted sleep, and shortness of breath climbing stairs. Twice, outside oxygen had to be brought in and pumped into the sealed structure to keep them functional. Here is the detail that stops people cold. The oxygen was not leaking out. Nothing was escaping. The system was as sealed as it was designed to be. The soils inside had been deliberately loaded with organic matter, so the farm would be productive enough to feed 8 adults for 2 years. It was a reasonable decision, and it set the trap. Microbes in that rich soil respired far harder than anyone had modeled, consuming oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. In a working cycle, the plants would have taken that carbon dioxide and returned the oxygen. But the concrete of the structure was unsealed, and raw concrete absorbs carbon dioxide. It carbonated. It turned the gas into calcium carbonate and held onto it permanently. The oxygen never left the building. It had been chemically bound into the building. For 2 years, 8 people were slowly breathing their atmosphere into the walls, and nobody understood that until they started gasping on staircases. A second mission went in on the 6th of March, 1994. It ended early, after about 6 months, amid management disputes and a change of control. It is all still there. The University of Arizona has owned it since 2011 and runs it as an Earth Systems research facility with controlled experiments under the same glass. More than 3 million people have visited since 1991, including over 500,000 schoolchildren. It remains the largest closed ecological system ever built. It is simply no longer sealed with anyone inside it. They built a world to find out whether we could carry one with us into space. What they actually measured was how much of a world you can get wrong while standing in the middle of it, breathing it every single day. Number 9. 2 guns. The zoo above the death cave. Harry E. Miller had a theory, and the theory was correct. Motorists will not stop for gas. Motorists will stop for a story. In the early 1920s, Earl and Louise Cundiff homesteaded roughly 320 acres on the east rim of Canyon Diablo, on what was then the National Old Trails Highway. They ran a trading post, a restaurant, a gas station, and a post office. An ordinary roadside business on an ordinary road in flat high desert scrub split open by a 200-foot canyon. In 1925, Miller leased land from them, and the ordinary business ended. He built stone pens and filled them with mountain lions, cougars, snakes, and Gila monsters. He built a curio shop. He presented himself as an Apache chief, which he was not, and took the name Crazy Thunder. He hired Hopi laborers to construct false stone cliff dwellings above the site, so the ground would look older and more significant than it was. The name Two Guns came from a silent Western star, William S. Hart, who was known as Two Gun Bill, and below all of it was the cave. The story attached to that cave is dark and very old, and it should be treated as local tradition rather than documented history, because most versions of it trace back to one dramatized 20th century book. What is not in question is what Miller did with it. He ran paid tours down into it. He installed electric lighting. He put in a concession stand. And he sold human skeletal remains taken from that cave to tourists as souvenirs on their way through to Los Angeles. The lease that made all of this possible was vague, and the two men fought over its terms for a year. On the 3rd of March, 1926, the argument ended when Miller shot and killed Earl Cundiff, who was unarmed. Accounts of exactly how it unfolded differ. The outcome does not. Miller was tried, and Miller was acquitted. He went back to running the zoo. Over the following years, he was mauled by his own mountain lions on 2 separate occasions, and bitten by one of his own Gila monsters, which left him with an infection that took months to clear. What finally killed Two Guns was not a curse and not a court. It was engineering. In 1938, Route 66 was realigned across a new bridge just to the north, and the traffic stopped coming past the door. Ben Dreyer bought the place in 1960 and rebuilt it with a motel, a restaurant, a tavern, a service station, and a new zoo. A fire gutted the whole operation in 1971. It has been abandoned since. You can see it from Interstate 40. Exit 230, then a short stretch of broken pavement. The hand-laid stone walls of the zoo are still standing. The chicken wire long rusted away, the cages open to the sky. There is a burned roundhouse that was a Texaco station, cottage foundations, a graffiti-covered empty swimming pool, and the 1915 steel arch of the Canyon Diablo Bridge. Every structure on that site was built to make people stop. They are now 20 seconds off a freeway carrying thousands of cars an hour, and almost nobody turns the wheel. Number 8. Ruby, the town behind the locked gate. On the 3rd of June, 2024, the owners locked the gate, and one of the best-preserved ghost towns in the American Southwest stopped being reachable by anybody. It sits below Montana Peak in Santa Cruz County, about 7 miles north of the Mexican border, at the end of miles of unpaved road that crosses wash after wash. Tawny grass hillsides, mesquite, bare rock ridges, 2 blue lakes made by an old mill dam rimmed with pale sand that is actually mine tailings. A beach in the middle of the desert. It began as Montana Camp in the 1870s. The post office opened under the name Ruby in April 1912. The Montana mine became the largest lead and zinc producer in Arizona and turned out gold and silver as well. By the 1930s, about 1,200 people lived there, with roughly 150 children in the school. The town also happened to sit in country with no meaningful law enforcement, and it had exactly one store worth robbing. In February 1920, brothers Alex and John Fraser were shot and killed during a robbery at the Ruby Mercantile. In August 1921, the store's new operators, Frank and Myrtle Pearson, were robbed and killed in the same building. In July 1922, 2 men arrested for those crimes briefly escaped custody, killing 2 more people as they went, and set off the largest manhunt in the history of the Southwest. 6 dead, in 3 incidents, in under 30 months, all of it circling one general store. The mine outlived all of it by nearly 20 years. Then the ore ran out, the mine closed in 1940, and the town emptied so completely that the post office shut in May 1941, and residents left carrying their own building materials with them. What survived because the land went private and stayed fenced. Around 25 buildings still stand. The 1916 schoolhouse still has chalkboards on the walls. There is the jail, the mine offices, the head frame, a playground. The main shaft drops somewhere between 700 and 750 feet, with lateral bores running out around 2,000 feet. It is on the National Register of Historic Places. Public tours ran for 30 years, from 1994. Then the family who had cared for it decided it had simply become too much work. The gate closed permanently. More than 100,000 Mexican free-tailed bats still arrive at the mine every year in late spring. At dusk, they come out of the shaft in a rushing column over a town of 25 empty buildings, and there is now nobody standing there to watch them do it. Number 7. Canyon Diablo, the town that named a meteorite. The town exists because somebody in a factory measured wrong. In 1880, construction crews for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad reached a canyon in what is now Coconino County. They needed a bridge. By most accounts, the bridge span that was delivered to the site was the wrong size and would not reach across, and everything stopped while a new one was made. That left roughly 2,000 men on the rim of a canyon, in bare treeless country, with wages in their pockets and nothing whatsoever to do. A town assembled itself in days. 2 facing rows of buildings along a rockbed street, saloons and gambling houses and brothels, serving railroad workers and the outlaws and gamblers who followed the payroll. The residents did not call the main street Main Street. They called it Hell Street. No lawmen were employed there initially, and the town's reputation for what happened as a result has been told and retold ever since, mostly from one dramatized account, so treat the more colorful version as folklore. When the bridge was finally finished, the town emptied almost as fast as it had appeared, and it was gone by the early 20th century. Here is what makes this one different. The afterlife is stranger than the life. About 12 miles to the southeast is a hole in the desert nearly a mile across, punched into the ground roughly 50,000 years ago. When fragments of the object that made it were first collected, they were catalogued under the name of the nearest settlement. That settlement was Canyon Diablo. The meteorite has been the Canyon Diablo meteorite ever since. The man who chased it was Daniel Barringer. From 1903 to 1929, he drilled the crater floor, looking for a buried mass of iron he believed was worth a fortune. He never found it. In 1929, the astronomer F.R. Moulton calculated that the impacting body had weighed about 300,000 tons, roughly 3% of Barringer's estimate, and that it had vaporized on impact. There was nothing down there to find. Barringer died 10 days after receiving that conclusion. The vindication came in July 1960 when Edward Chow, Eugene Shoemaker, and Beth Madsen published their identification of coesite in the crater rock. Coesite had never previously been found anywhere in nature. It ended the argument about the crater's origin and effectively opened the field of astrogeology. Today, there is almost nothing at Canyon Diablo. Stone foundations, scattered rubble, an old cemetery, and the railroad grade running out to the canyon edge. No signs, no services, easy to drive straight past. A town that could not hold itself together for 20 years is now printed on museum labels on 4 continents. It survived by becoming a filing category. Number 6. Swansea, the smelter that never smelted. Swansea is a port in South Wales with a 200-year reputation for copper. It is also a name lying in the creosote flats of La Paz County, Arizona, about 4 miles south of the Bill Williams River, 30 miles of graded dirt from Parker, in country that is genuinely far from anything. The name was borrowed on purpose. Ore from this district had originally been shipped to Wales for smelting, and the settlement, previously called Signal, took the destination's name. It sounded like a company that knew what it was doing. Founded in 1908, and the building started immediately. By the end of that year, there was a 350-ton furnace going up, a 3.5-mile water pipeline running from the Bill Williams River, and hoists under construction for 5 mine shafts. In 1910, the Arizona and Swansea Railroad began running the 25 miles up from Boos. The post office opened in March 1909. The town got an electric light company, an auto dealer, a lumber company, a theater, a saloon, and a couple of hundred residents, with some sources putting it as high as 500 by 1909. What it did not get was a mine with enough proven ore behind it. The promoter, Mitchell, spent on the things investors could see rather than on developing what was underground. A mining handbook published in 1913 described the operation as enthusiasm run wild, coupled with reckless stock selling and surface works built before there was ore to justify them. The economics were straightforward and fatal. Producing the copper cost 3 cents a pound more than the copper sold for. The company collapsed in 1912. Mitchell left in 1916. And the smelter, the largest structure on the site and the entire visual argument for the investment, largely did not process the ore. It went out on the railway to Clarkdale, Humboldt, and Sasko to be smelted by somebody else. Asarco bought the properties in 1914 and rebuilt much of the town, and wartime copper prices carried it for a while. When those collapsed, the post office closed in 1924, and the town was finished by the middle of that decade, while the mines limped on. It is one of the few places on this list you can still walk through. The Bureau of Land Management manages it now, with a kiosk, maps, capped shafts, and a marked route. The brick walls of the smelter and dust chamber stand. So do the adobe walls of the officials' houses, and a double row of plastered quarters for single men, which reads today as a line of identical empty doorways. Swansea was built to be photographed by people who would never make the trip. 100 years later, that is the only thing about it that still works. If you are finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps these get seen. And if you have ever pulled off an Arizona highway for a ruin or a strange sign that nobody could explain to you, put it in the comments. That is how we find places for future videos. Number 3 is still ahead. That is the one I told you to stay for. Number 5, Santa Claus, where Christmas died in the Mojave. Santa's house was 14 miles northwest of Kingman, at 3,392 feet in open Mojave Desert among Joshua trees, in a place that regularly hits 110 degrees. This was not a joke. It was a sales tactic. In the 1930s, a real estate agent named Nina Talbot moved from Los Angeles to Kingman with her husband to run a motel. She had 80 acres of raw desert she intended to subdivide into resort lots, and no earthly reason why anyone would want them. So in 1937, she built a reason. Santa Claus, Arizona, had buildings with pointed roofs and peppermint paint schemes. Children could meet Santa on any day of the year. There was a real, functioning United States post office, presented as Santa's workshop, which meant American families could send letters that came back stamped with a Santa Claus postmark. Every December, that was enormous. It worked as spectacle, and it kept working for a remarkably long time. Duncan Hines, then a restaurant critic rather than a brand of cake mix, rated the inn among the best places to eat in the region. Robert Heinlein said a short story around a meal served there in 1950. Jane Russell held a dinner at the site in 1954. None of it moved the land. After 12 years of running the town, Talbot sold her interest in 1949. Having failed to sell the desert lots, the entire place had been built to advertise. Nobody ever wanted to live there. The only residents were the people who worked there. The theme rotted slowly through the 70s and 80s, and the last attractions closed in 1995. For a while afterwards, it was a genuinely bleak roadside site. Candy-striped buildings going grey, a wishing well, and a pink children's train called Old 1225 sitting in the dirt under a coat of graffiti. Rattlesnakes moved in. Then, in late 2021 or early 2022, the remaining structures were torn down. There is nothing to see now. Straight highway, a flat lot, some concrete scars. You will drive past it without noticing. Nina Talbot built a town so persuasive that people drove hours to stand in it and then drove home. She sold the fantasy about 400 times over. She never once sold the thing the fantasy was for. Number 4. The domes of Casa Grande, the flying saucer that was just a factory. For 4 decades, the story went like this: cults, rituals, voices, footsteps in long curved concrete corridors that came back at you wrong, tapping on the outside of your car if you parked on Thornton Road at night. A paranormal television crew filmed there in 2016. It became one of the most photographed abandoned sites in the state. Here is the thing. It was a circuit board factory that never opened. In 1982, Intercon Technology, an electronics manufacturer out of Mountain View, California, began building a new headquarters on flat farmland south of Interstate 8. The shapes were an engineering decision, not an artistic one. Domes are cheap, they go up fast, and they hold their temperature in a place that hits 115 degrees. The construction method is the best part. A giant balloon was inflated on the foundation over a steel frame, sprayed with about 3 inches of polyurethane foam, coated with another 3 inches of concrete, and then deflated and pulled out. Roughly 6 weeks per building, about $150,000 each. Underground tunnels ran between them. 7 buildings were planned, 6 long caterpillar shapes for manufacturing, and 1 flying saucer for the office. 4 went up. Not a single circuit board was ever made. Intercon defaulted on a loan in 1983. The bank took the assets, and the company dissolved in 1986. What was left was a set of alien-looking concrete forms standing alone on dead flat ground, with no sign, no fence, and no explanation attached to them. So the desert wrote one. The end was administrative. The largest dome partially collapsed in December 2016. Pinal County condemned the structures in 2017. The owners fought the demolition order for about 5 years, and the county won. Demolition began on Monday, the 9th of January 2023, and was finished by the 11th at a cost of just under $129,000. The county said afterwards that the speed had been deliberate. They moved that fast because they were worried people would show up to watch. 40 years of ghost stories, and the only thing anyone was ever genuinely in danger from was falling concrete. Number 3. The Casa Grande photogrammetric test range. The grid in the dirt. This is the one I told you to stay for. A few miles from those domes, lying flat in the dirt, there are giant white concrete crosses, Maltese crosses, 60 feet from arm to arm. Each one has a small hatch on its western arm, with a concrete cover and protruding rebar. They sit in vacant lots on the edges of fields behind a shooting range, 20 feet off ordinary county roads, with no sign, no fence, and no interpretation of any kind. There were 272 of them. They were laid out on a grid 16 miles by 16 miles, 1 cross at every mile point, and they were all in place by 1967. The story everybody tells about them is that they were built to calibrate the cameras on Corona spy satellites. It is in travel guides. It has been repeated on television by an Arizona historian. It is a good story, and it is not true. They were built to check the accuracy of maps. In the 1960s, the United States was making an enormous amount of mapping from the air, and the only way to prove that a camera's geometry is accurate is to photograph something whose true dimensions you already know to the inch. So, the Army Map Service went looking for the flattest, driest, clearest ground it could find. It leased 272 parcels of Arizona desert, 100 feet by 100 feet each, everyone with road access, working through the Arizona Real Estate Office. Then it poured a 60-foot cross on each parcel, exactly a mile apart, in a perfect square. Aircraft, not spacecraft. Mapping cameras, not intelligence cameras. The whole grid was a ruler. Then Casa Grande grew. Roads, houses, and warehouses went in over most of the pattern, and the majority of the crosses were destroyed. A minority survive. 2 are easy to find from public roads, at South Montgomery and West Cornman, and at Cornman and Carmel Boulevard. The most secretive-looking object in the Arizona desert turned out to be a government checking its own homework. The truth was duller than the rumor, which is exactly why the rumor lasted 60 years. Number 2. High Jolly's Tomb, the Camel Driver's Pyramid. In a hard-packed dirt cemetery a block off the main street in Quartzsite, there is a stone pyramid, 9 feet on each side at the base and 8 feet tall, with a metal camel on top of it. The camel is 2 feet high and it faces west. It is a grave, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places. The man underneath it was Haji Ali, born around 1828. American soldiers flattened his name into High Jolly, and that is what stuck. In the 1850s, the United States Army had a desert transport problem and a genuinely serious plan to solve it: buy camels. The experiment was approved by the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, who would later become President of the Confederacy. Roughly 70 animals were shipped in, and experienced drivers came with them. The plaque records that High Jolly arrived in this country on the 10th of February 1856. The Camel Corps ran from 1856 to 1866. The animals worked. What killed the program was politics and horses. Davis left for the Confederacy and the political backing went with him, and the camels terrified every horse and mule they came near. The Corps was dissolved and the surviving animals were auctioned off, some to circuses and zoos, some simply released into the desert. High Jolly stayed. He worked in the Southwest for another 4 decades as a packer, a scout, a courier, and a prospector, settled in Quartzsite, and died there on the 16th of December, 1902. His is the first of 124 graves in the cemetery's Pioneer section. The Arizona Highway Department built the pyramid, and the governor dedicated it in 1935. And on that plaque, the state of Arizona put an opinion on a failed military program. It reads, "A fair trial might have resulted in complete success." That is a government monument that is still, 90 years later, quietly arguing it should have been given more time. Number 1. Tortilla Flat. Population 6. 6 people live here. The bar stools are saddles. The walls are covered in other people's money. The saloon interior is the thing everyone comes for. Dollar bills, floor to ceiling, across the walls and over the ceiling, each one signed by somebody who was passing through. Visitors write on a bill, hand it to a server, and it goes up. The staff need a ladder now because there is very little surface left. Bills have come from dozens of countries. None of them are ever taken down, and nobody working there knows how much is up there. The town sits on State Route 88, the Apache Trail, northeast of Apache Junction, at 1,750 feet, among the red and ochre walls of the Superstition Mountains, with saguaro on every ridge. The drive-in is one of the best in Arizona, climbing Twisting Road above Canyon Lake, blind curves, drop-offs, and then a single row of wooden buildings appears with no warning at all. It exists because of a dam. When Roosevelt Dam was under construction, freight teams hauling supplies through the Superstitions needed somewhere to stop, and this was it. Every other stop on that route eventually died. This one did not, because the road turned into one of the great scenic drives of the Southwest, and the stop became the reason to make the drive. The main street is the only street. Saloon, mercantile, gift shop, mailroom, and a museum that is a replica schoolhouse standing where the first school opened in 1932. 2 bridges nearby are on the National Register, one from 1924 and one from 1937. It is the last surviving stagecoach stop on the Apache Trail, and it is still open, still serving, still 6 people. Everywhere else on this list, people left something behind by accident. Here, thousands of strangers have deliberately left a small signed piece of themselves on a wall in a town of 6 so that something of them stays after the car pulls out. It is the cheapest form of immortality in Arizona, and it costs $1. We started this one at the deep end, with a building that ate its own atmosphere, and worked our way out to a saloon papered in signed dollar bills. Arizona holds both of those, about 150 miles apart. For me, it is Ruby. 25 buildings, chalkboards still on the schoolhouse walls, and a gate that closed in June 2024, with nobody left to walk past it. That one stays with me. Which of these surprised you most, and which Arizona place did we miss? Tell us in the comments. If this kind of forgotten American history is what you are after, subscribe. There are places like these in every state, and we are working through